My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day. Waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. Going to make it wealthy, good and wealthy. For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike. American steel workers, auto workers, farmers, and skilled craftsmen, we have a lot of them here with us today. They really suffered gravely. They watched in anguish as foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream. We had an American dream that you don't hear so much about. You did 4 years ago, and you are now, but you don't too often, and for many years and decades even, you didn't hear too much about. Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but it is not going to happen anymore. It's not going to happen.
And with that characteristically provocative speech, Donald Trump made good on his promise to unleash a slew of tariffs on the whole world. The move obviously is aimed towards cutting the US trade deficit, which was $122 billion in February. So, the formal process for what happened on Wednesday started on January 20th, when by signing the America First Trade Policy Presidential Memorandum, Trump directed his office to investigate the causes of US's quote-unquote large and persistent annual trade deficits in goods. He also asked his administration to quote-unquote review and identify any unfair trade practices by other countries. On February 13th, he ordered a review of what he called other countries' non-reciprocal trading practices. And on April 1st, he received the final results of these investigations, and then, well, mayhem. So under the new regime, there'll be a baseline tariff of 10% uniformly levied on all trading countries. And on top of that, additional individualized tariffs. So China gets a 34%, plus 20% that it was already levied. Vietnam gets 46%, Sri Lanka 44%, Bangladesh 37%, and India is slapped with a 27% tariff. In fact, India found several mentions in Trump's speech on Wednesday and subsequent documents as a trading partner that has been levying disproportionately high tariffs on a range of goods, from vehicles to switches and routers to apples. Now, Trump's move would not have come as a surprise, and yet it shocked most of the world. Economists across the world called it an unmitigated disaster. They said the tariffs were frivolously calculated and the move would do all harm and no good and negatively impact world trade like it hadn't been impacted since World War II. China called it a case of unilateral bullying. Asian markets plunged on Thursday, while India, perhaps reposing faith on the government and its relationships with the US, did better. US, ironically, saw its markets crash, with as much as $2 trillion of market cap wiped out in just the first few minutes of trade. So, is Trump's Liberation Day announcement going to bring in a new world order? Or is it unsustainable because of not just apprehended trade wars across the world, but also inflation concerns within the US? How will the world react? And most importantly, of course, how will India be affected and what will it do? Especially at a time when its own bilateral trade deal with the US is in the works. We ask all these questions in today's episode. It's Friday, the 4th of April. I'm your host Anirban Chowdhury, and this is the Morning Brief. My guest today is Professor Biswajit Dhar from the Council of Social Development. He was a professor at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning in Jawaharlal Nehru University and has served as the Director General of the Research and Information System for Developing Countries, a think tank of the Ministry of External Affairs. Professor Dhar was instrumental in the establishment of the Center for WTO Studies for the Government of India and was the head of the center for several years. He has also served as a senior consultant in the Planning Commission and as a member of the Indian delegation in multilateral treaty negotiations. Professor Dhar, very warm welcome to the Morning Brief.
Thank you very much.
Professor, before we started recording, you were telling me how the seeds of what happened on Wednesday had been sown long back, right? In fact, if someone were to read something like the Council of Economic Advisors chairperson Stephen Mirren's November report titled A User's Guide to Restructuring the Global Trading System, they would have had a fair idea of not just what was going to happen, but the intent very clearly as well. Why don't we start with that?
Yeah, this is quite remarkable. This paper by Miran is very interesting because you can actually see it almost gives a blow-by-blow account of what is now happening through the White House and around it. So all the Trump's policies, including the America First trade policy, which is the overarching framework under which all these actions are being taken, really, one can see its origins in the Miran paper. So what he says, they actually analyzes the cause of US's problems as of today. And he says that this is because US has an overvalued currency. And then he looks at various options of, either addressing this problem of overvalued currency and what to do about this. And the other option is using tariffs. And this option has actually been talked about in the past as well. A lot of scholars like Rudy Dornbush and others, they have actually looked at this option much earlier. And most of these guys actually seem to suggest that tariff is the way forward. And then they say that, tariffs would actually help the American economy revive. And this is Miran's argument, because tariffs would generate a lot of revenue. And the major problem that the US faces in terms of fiscal deficit and rising debt burden, that can be addressed. And the government can then focus on areas which it is needed to make the US more competitive. So it is a very neat kind of a framework. And then finally, which is important in the context that we are discussing, it says that tariffs can then be used to leverage greater market access or, market access opportunities in partner countries, which means that these high tariffs can be used to negotiate lowering of tariffs in partner countries. And I think that the next thing that is going to happen, because now he has put these high tariffs, now in various ways, he's going to now come and his advisors would now come and start pushing us to reduce tariffs in sectors where they think they can actually get larger market access in India.
And other countries, yes. So, everything that experts are saying or critiquing, like the seemingly frivolous way or ambiguous way in which this tariff structure has been calculated, or the fact that these aren't really sustainable rates, all this would tell you that it's a short-term negotiating tactic, right? Or rather the first step to a larger trade play, so to speak. What do you say?
Yes, indeed. So actually, I can visualize Trump sitting on a huge chessboard, and he's actually made this opening gambit. And of course, this can't last forever because will be inflationary pressures that the US will face. And then if it deepens, it can also lead to some kind of depression. So if he keeps pushing the tariff agenda too far, then the US could be looking at a stagflation not too far along in future. So that he's not going to do. So what he's going to do is, and remember, his ultimate objective, and this is the America First trade policy, is to reduce trade deficits with major trade partners. Yeah. And how does he do that? He does that by forcing trade partners to buy more from the US. And of course, putting these tariffs to prevent trade partners from exporting more to the US. Yeah. So this is a two-pronged strategy that he's going to use. But I think in the coming weeks and months, we're going to see more action on this front from our perspective. Is going to put pressure on the Indian government to bring down tariffs on a number of products.
Okay, understood. Professor, would you analyze the executive order for me? Is it confusing? I mean, for instance, in the morning, people were saying the India number was 26%. Then it was revealed that it was 27%. How do you see that?
Well, the executive order, of course, has a lot of ambiguities. Yeah. And the first thing I must point out, and this is something that we've been discussing all day long, is what is the extent of tariff that has been imposed on India? Now, plain reading of the text would tell me that it's 37% of that has been imposed. 10% will be imposed on 5th of April. And furthermore, and that's the language that is being used in the executive order, furthermore, will be 27% will be kicking in on 9th of April. So which makes a total of 27%. So the 10% is the base duty, which will be applied to everyone. And then there are country-specific tariffs, which are applied in respect of 57 countries.
Okay, let's talk about impact and, of course, India impact. Which sectors would be hit the most and which ones do you think will be insulated?
First, the good news. The good news is that two of our largest export sectors, I would say industries actually, manufacturing industry. One is pharmaceutical, which is the largest exporter, and petroleum products. Now, these two sectors, two industries, have been exempted from all the tariff or the reciprocal tariff increases. This means quite a bit because we're expecting some pressure on the pharma industry, given the kind of lobbies that there are in the US, the big pharma. But I think for a change, President Trump has listened to reason, and he's not being adamant that the tariffs will not be passed on to the consumers, the American consumers, and they will not get hurt. So he's in a way, he's tacitly accepted the fact that tariffs will result in rise in prices, and therefore he's trying to insulate major sectors from our point of view. Then there are also, rare earths and stuff which is also exempted. So that's a good news, I would say. But the bad news is that there are three other, major sectors, starting with electronics, which is the fastest growing export sector, then gems and jewellery, and textiles and clothing, especially I would say clothing. Now, these three sectors would see imposition of reciprocal tariffs. And, as you all know, that these three sectors have a preponderance of small firms, and especially gems and jewellery and clothing sectors. There are micro enterprises there.
These are businesses that have already been suffering due to inflation and loss of demand in the West.
That is right. Yeah. That is right. Yeah, that is right. So these are the sectors which have been hit most during the pandemic, and many of these sectors have been struggling to come back. And now there's this additional burden that has been imposed on them.
Right, understood. Professor, how do you react to this opinion that as far as the tariff list is concerned, India is better off than countries like not just China, but also Vietnam, which has been a go-to for countries to set up manufacturing units, and Bangladesh, which is a tough competitor to India on garment exports. All three countries, China, Vietnam, and Bangladesh, have been levied higher tariffs than India. And so many people are saying that this could be an opportunity that India can use. What do you say to that?
No, look, I don't think that's much of an opportunity. Let me take the example of garments, for instance. Now we know that for over a year now, the Bangladeshi garment industry has been in turmoil. And, they have actually got affected quite considerably. But there is no evidence that we have been able to take advantage of the loss that Bangladesh has suffered in the global markets. So that's point number one.
Right.
The second thing I would say that about China and Vietnam, I think these two countries have shown remarkable ability to adjust. And like I was saying, in case of earlier point I was making, that unlike India, these countries have found alternate markets. Again, giving the example of China, before the pandemic, the share of China's exports to the US was between 18 and 19%. And now it's down to 14% or slightly below 14%. So which means in 5 years, they have actually moved away from the US and diversified into other markets, including India, because their share in India has actually gone up. And Vietnam is pretty much, on the same pathway as China is. So
Right.
these two countries are completely different as compared to what we have in India. I think we must recognize that, at the end of the day, all the countries have been hit. And the impact on different countries would be the ability of each individual country to adjust the new challenge that has come. And in that respect, I would think that we are no better than some of the Southeast Asian countries. Even I would think Cambodia and Laos, which have actually done quite well over the past few years. So I think that, there is no point of us actually looking at others and saying, well, those guys have got hit more, and therefore we should be satisfied with whatever is happening. We should be looking at our ability to ride the storm and ride it successfully so that, as I said earlier, that the damage is minimized.
Finally, Professor, how do you see Trump's move and how India should react to it in light of the fact that there is also a bilateral trade agreement in the works between India and the US?
Yeah, I think, we have to get our act together. And I don't think that we have done that, because till now, whatever reports we have been getting is that, we seem to be complying, or we seem to be falling in line with Trump's pressures of bringing down tariffs. We brought down tariffs on EVs. Then earlier we brought down tariffs on motorcycles. But we need a comprehensive strategy to really negotiate effectively with the US, with the sole objective of minimizing the damage, I would think. Because as I said, that Trump's objective is to increase the presence of US entities in, say, for instance, in agricultural sector and major sectors. So our government, the Indian government has to get its act together to ensure that the damage is minimized. What we need basically is to really walk on two legs, which we should have done much earlier, in the sense that, our domestic, both industry and agriculture, we know it for a fact that it's not at all competitive. And we needed to invest in efficiency building so that we stand import competition. Now, one of the things that we could actually do is buy time. I'm not sure whether Trump is going to be willing to do that, but I think it is important for us to use our large market as a negotiating counter, because we know he needs the market. So the sectors which are really sensitive, for instance, agriculture, some of the MSME dominated sectors, we must negotiate a longer transition period for bringing down the tariffs. Now, I'm not, for instance, happy with the PLI scheme because it was only sort of carrot, but no stick. And we're seeing what is happening to the PLI scheme is actually floundering. I think the government must put in place a very effective policy framework, a scheme that ensures that there is delivery at the end of the day. The investors deliver efficient entities at the end of, say, maybe 5 years, which could be negotiated through a trade agreement.
Professor Dhar, thank you so much for your insights and for joining us on the Morning Brief.
Thank you very much for having me.
That's it for today. This, I'm sure, is the first of many episodes as the world starts to understand, deal with, and react to the repercussions of Liberation Day. And we at the Morning Brief will try to explain much of that, if not all, in subsequent episodes. This episode was produced by me and Rajas Naik, sound designed by Indranil Bhattacharjee. Keep listening to the Morning Brief every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. Have a good weekend. The clip used in this episode belongs to its owner. Credits are mentioned in the description.